Hi, my name is State Senator Ed Kennedy, and I'd like to welcome you to the 4th edition of the Beacon Hill Buzz. And my guest with me today is Ben Adeyinka, who is the Deputy Administrator for the Housing Court. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you for having me here, Senator Kennedy.
And maybe the best way to start would be for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you spent some time, you lived in Lowell for a while, but why don't you just tell us about that?
Well, thank you. First off, thank you for having me here, Senator. I really appreciate the opportunity to provide some insight on the Housing Court. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My parents are Nigerian, and I came to the Commonwealth to study law in 2008, 2009. And my first stop was Lowell. I lived at apartments not too far from here on Hildreth Street. I enjoyed the community of Lowell. It was very vibrant and up and coming, and I'm happy to be back.
Okay, and so you're the Deputy Court Administrator for the Housing Court, and could you tell us a little bit about the Housing Court?
Sure.
How it came about?
Sure. First off, I am the Deputy Court Administrator of the Housing Court, and I'm the first African American Deputy Court Administrator of the Housing Court, and I'm proud to say that. Prior to becoming the Deputy Court Administrator, I was also the court's attorney for many years. I was the court's attorney for 4 years for the Housing Court. And my role as Deputy Court Administrator, we have approximately 140 full-time employees, 15 judges, 6 clerk magistrates, and it's an exciting time to be in the Housing Court. Lots of changes. Recently, the Housing Court expanded in 2017, thanks to the work of advocates and legislature and senators like you and House representatives. We were able to expand the Housing Court to provide access to individuals in roughly 84 cities and towns, which equates to 2 million citizens with access to the Housing Court. In my role as Deputy Court Administrator, I work with Chief Justice Timothy F. Sullivan. He's a wonderful individual, committed to public service. I took this role in 2018 of September, and my predecessor, prior to me taking this role, the person that held the position was Paul Burke, and he had the position for about 10, 12 years, 44 years in the trial court. So as you can imagine, someone like myself, I had some big shoes to fill, but I'm proud to be in this position. I take the job very seriously, and I'm committed to providing resources to the Commonwealth in the arena of housing.
And Ben, could you tell us some of the things that the Housing Court does? What do they have jurisdiction over?
That's a great question, Senator. Some people don't realize the Housing Court does more than just landlord-tenant disputes. That's pretty much 80% of our caseload is landlord-tenant disputes. We call it summary process evictions. In fiscal year 19, which just passed, we did about 31,000 roughly summary process evictions. And we also have jurisdiction over anything that affects the health, safety, and welfare of residential occupants. So we have jurisdiction over small claims, code enforcement matters. When I say code enforcement, I mean enforcement actions to enforce the state sanitary code. Small claims actions, usually dealing with security deposits or breach of contracts, has to stem from landlord-tenant disputes. And we do a tremendous amount of work with our receivership program as well. The Housing Court is unique because we have several resources, such as the Tenancy Preservation Program. We're one of the few courts that are uniquely connected to the Tenancy Preservation Program. As we expanded the Housing Court, the Tenancy Preservation Program also expanded. We also have the Lawyer for the Day program here in the Housing Court. And the Lawyer for the Day program is a very unique program where we provide services. It's all volunteer-based, and we partner with certain organizations to provide representation to those that do not have attorneys. It's no surprise, but the Housing Court is probably one of the highest population of self-represented litigants, self-represented meaning pro se individuals that come into the court. I think right behind us is the Probate and Family Court. So it's important that we partner with organizations to provide legal services for those who can't afford an attorney. And primarily, it's on the tenant side where we see the disparities with representation.
So one of the features of the housing court is the lawyer for a day feature, and that is available to tenants, but also to landlords as well if they don't have if they need to ask legal questions.
You make an excellent point. We're committed on procedural fairness, so yes, the lawyer for the day table must be balanced in our 6 divisions of the housing court. So we do provide representation for both landlords and tenants. We don't take a side. We don't advocate, we adjudicate. But it's important that we keep a balance. It just so happens that one side of the V is more unrepresented than the other side. When I say that, I mean more tenants are less likely to be represented than landlords. But it is a balanced program, and Chief Justice Sullivan and I, we've discussed the program at length, and we need to maintain procedural fairness and balance in the program. In the divisions that we have seen issues where we can't have representation on one side, we've taken proactive measures to number one, say, hey, listen, to the divisional leaders, get more attorneys to help landlords as well. And they've taken that seriously, and I'm proud to report that each and every one of our divisions of the housing court has a lawyer for the day program, and it is balanced.
Okay. And so if, let's take landlords first. If landlords, I imagine what would, the reason that they would go into the housing court would be for evictions. And I know that basically there are 2 types of tenants, tenants at will and tenants who have leases. And so, is that true? Is that the main reason they come? And could you give talk about the distinction between those types of tenancies?
That's a great question. As you mentioned, those were 2 specific types of tenants. Tenants that have a lease, we call those, tenants under a term of a lease. And then you have tenants at will, meaning tenants that are not necessarily within a lease, but every time they pay and they retain possession, the lease it automatically becomes a month-to-month situation. It's very important for landlords to understand that the way you start is the way you finish. So we've had some landlords who have taken the steps to try to recover possession through summary process. And Senator, they may have taken incorrect steps. So for instance, they may have had a tenant who was on a lease, in a 12-month lease, and they may have served a notice to quit for 30 days and saying they just want the premises back. But again, a contract is a lease. So with landlord-tenant law, there's other areas of law that intersect, one being contract law. So the contract is what governs in our court. So if you have a lease that goes from August 2019 to July 2020, you have to take steps to terminate that lease for non-payment, et cetera, in certain situations. We've seen oftentimes where a landlord may serve an incorrect notice, or a landlord may start the process without allowing that notice to expire. So there's several types of tenancies, and each must be treated specifically. We've also have seen where tenants can proactively terminate a lease. Recently, the legislature enacted a statute that deals with domestic violence. So sometimes an individual, they may be living or cohabitating, maybe a boyfriend or girlfriend or husband and wife are living under the same roof, and they have a lease. If there's a domestic violence situation, the tenant can affirmatively terminate the lease by providing notice to the landlord. The unique thing about the housing court is all of these areas of law, our judges have set precedent, and they are experts in this area of law. As you know, the housing court has concurrent jurisdiction, meaning we share jurisdiction with our colleagues in the district court. But we have seen 80% of the summary process or eviction cases wind up in the housing court. And again, I think it's because of our subject matter expertise, Senator. I think it's because of the resources that we have to offer. And I think it's also because of our user-friendly nature. We strive ourselves on being a court that individuals can come and feel comfortable speaking and talking to us in lay terms. Tell us what your problem is, and we're going to try to figure out how the court can redress that issue.
Okay. And what about if you're a tenant? The reason that you would come into court would be because you weren't happy with the landlord for a variety of reasons, or I would think primarily that would be for code violations, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
I think majority of our tenants who do come into our court on an affirmative case, meaning they're bringing the case, is exactly for that reason, Senator.
Okay.
It's for enforcement of the state sanitary code. We see typically in the winter months several calls, no heat, no hot water. The first thing a tenant should do in that situation is, number one, call the Board of Health, your local Board of Health, or your code enforcement agency. They'll come to the property and they will issue a citation, and they'll send a copy to the landlord, the owner that's registered with the city. If that doesn't work, a tenant can come into court proactively and file a request for injunctive relief, which essentially means they want the court to compel someone to do or stop doing something. And typically it's in the situation where, in that example where there's no heat, they can come in and file a temporary restraining order to compel the landlord to turn the heat or hot water back on. What happens if they come into our court? They usually come in on an emergency. Sometimes we call it ex parte, without notice to the other side. The court will usually issue a 10-day restraining order to compel the landlord to do something. That tenant can take that to the landlord, and the court usually will have a housing specialist contact the landlord and say, hey, just so you know, your tenant was in here, they filed this action, you're ordered to do this by court order by a certain period of time. Failure to comply can result in penalties and sanctions. We hope remediation is, we strive, our goal in the housing court is remediation. We don't want to punish or penalize anyone, but if the state sanitary code is not enforced, then we have to take those measures to make sure compliance is done.
Okay. And probably, I would imagine that there are some people that would need to go to the housing court that don't speak English, both in Lowell, primarily in Lowell, but probably in the surrounding communities as well. And you know, I think there's more and more people that don't speak English. And so how would they avail themselves of the services provided by the housing court?
That's a great question. We have a tremendous amount of individuals who are non-English or limited English proficient that come into the housing court. And what we pride ourselves in all levels in the housing court, be it the housing specialist department, be it in the judge's lobby, be it in the clerk's office, several individuals within the housing court are bilingual. Some are trilingual. The predominant language in the housing court among the staff, particularly in the Northeast, is Spanish. It's one of the most sought after languages of needing translation according to our information within the Commonwealth. So we've equipped our housing specialists with the ability to number one, we embrace their culture, and we want to make sure that individuals can relate to the litigants that they're serving and the community and the population of the individuals within the housing court reflect the community they serve. So all that being said, if someone does not speak English, that's not a barrier to come into the housing court.
Okay.
They should pick up the phone, and the first call usually is to our housing specialist department. In the Northeast, we have roughly 6 housing specialists. 3 are bilingual, including the chief housing specialist, who is Martha Buckley. We do have an associate justice in the Northeast Housing Court who is also the first Latino to have that position as a judge in the housing court. His name is Judge Del Porto. And our first justice, Judge Dalton, who has a familiarity with working with limited English proficient individuals. She was a clerk before she was a judge. And our acting clerk right now is Jeffrey Hernandez, who is bilingual as well. Many of those individuals know the population, know the areas, and every division of our housing court is unique based on demographics, population, and needs. So it's very important in our court. We have services. We have the limited English proficiency or language access line. And then we have those individuals within the court who are bilingual. And third, we have a department called the Office of Court Interpreter Services. if someone is in need of redress and needs to come into the court, language should not be a barrier.
Okay. And the housing court sits on Mondays at the Lowell Superior Court, but if you needed to go to the housing court on another day, what would you have to do?
It's a challenging question. As you said, we do sit here on Mondays in Lowell, but if you needed to file something on a non-Monday and you were a resident of Lowell, unfortunately, you would have to either come into the Northeast Housing Court, which is located in 2 permanent locations. One is in Lawrence. It's called the Fenton Judicial Center, located on 2 Appleton Street in Lawrence, Mass. And then the other one is the Ruane Judicial Center, located in Salem, which is southern Essex. So, unfortunately, if someone wanted to come into a housing court and they lived in Lowell on a non-Monday, the only option is they would have to go into the main location, which is in the north, those 2 locations in the Northeast, in Salem or in Lawrence. The other way we're trying to provide greater access to the Commonwealth is to allow individuals to file things electronically. There's a big push in the trial court to bring our case filing and case flow management system into the new century of technology, to allow individuals, like for instance in this case here, an individual can file electronically right now a small claims action in the housing court without even going into the courthouse. We have, the trial court has partnered with Tyler Technologies to issue what we call the Odyssey Guide and File. Imagine TurboTaxes. You input certain information, and at the end it'll spit out a complaint, and you can electronically file that with the court. It's all a web-based program, and those services are being introduced into the housing court and to the greater trial court. We do have a pilot that allows, right now, just mainly attorneys to file a summary process action electronically within the housing court, including the Northeast. So someone could file a summary process eviction if they were an attorney from their office without having to come in to the Northeast Housing Court. The push is to allow all individuals, be it attorney or self-represented litigant, to be able to have that access electronically to the courthouse, because that's where the future is going.
Okay. And is that the way it's likely to be after the pilot program is complete? In other words, then it will be opened up to the general public and they'll be able to avail themselves of filing electronically rather than to have to go to Lawrence?
That's the goal. That's the goal, to allow all individuals to have access electronically to the court. Yeah, so that is the goal. It's a slow climb in the Commonwealth, but under Court Administrator Williams, he has a very strong push to digitize the trial court. And Chief Justice Carey also shares that, and I understand that Chief Justice Gantz is also supportive of that. So both Chief Justice Sullivan and I in the housing court have committed to embracing technology. If it's going to enhance the user experience, that's something we want to explore. So to your point, it's coming.
Yeah.
It's just going to take a little bit of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned small claims, and I know that at the district court they have a session for small claims, or at least they always did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if they do now, but so the small claims at the housing court would handle, are they different than what you'd see at the district court, or?
They're absolutely
how does that go?
different. No, that's a great question, because although we share jurisdiction with the district court on several case types like small claims, in the district court, predominantly what you will see in small claims will be debt collection cases. Whereas in our small claims cases, the nexus has to deal with residential property. So for instance, most of our small claims cases will deal with, Senator, maybe a breach of a security deposit. So I was your tenant and you were my landlord. I've given you a security deposit 5 years ago. I'm getting ready to leave. I send you notice that I'm leaving and we're going on our way, but the security deposit has to be given back based on the statute. So there's certain requirements that allow for an individual to recover the security deposit if they haven't damaged the property, etc. So in that instance, you see a greater emphasis on individuals utilizing the housing court for those type of actions. Again, it has to deal with residential property, so we see it on small claims, security deposit, which is a little different than what the district court is used to seeing, which is debt collection cases, credit card cases.
Right.
But we also have small claims where people come in to enforce a contract or a breach of contract. A tenant might have given a deposit to hold an apartment, and the landlord, for whatever reason, may not have secured that apartment for the tenant. The tenant could bring a case in the housing court under small claims to enforce that breach of contract. So that's a little bit of the difference between our small claims jurisdiction and the district court's jurisdiction in small claims.
Okay. So right now where you are is on Gorham Street in the Superior Courthouse, which is an older building.
Sir.
It's actually, I think, within the National Park District, which means it's also historically protected. And it's actually, when you look at that building, it's the brick part in the back that is the older part of the building, not the front part that looks more like concrete. But soon, and I think just about everybody in the city realizes this, or anybody that comes into Lowell, you can't miss it, will be, the Judicial Center will be done. It's quite a large building, and when it is, those courthouses, the Superior Courthouse, the District Courthouse on Hurd Street, as well as 89 Appleton Street, they'll all become vacant. And so you'll be moving there, is that correct?
That is correct, and we're excited about this. As you know, you've just mentioned the Superior Court. I've practiced in that court before I was an attorney for the Housing Court, before I worked in the Housing Court. I did a lot of litigation in the older Superior Court located on Gorham Street. As we both know, it's an older facility. In the summertime right now, I was just coming by and passed by the courthouse, and I saw some of the housing court personnel there. And it's an interesting place because the ACs are there, they're window units, but they can be rather loud. And it's a huge space, so to hear a judge can be problematic or a little challenging in that older building, let alone some of the restrooms and facilities could be brought up to date. So I'm grateful that the trial court, along with the legislature, has come together and come up with this plan to build this Lowell Judicial Center. I think it's going to be a wonderful thing for the community of Lowell. It will offer more of a permanent presence for the housing court. We will have dedicated space, Senator. And the scenario that you just mentioned before, what would a litigant have to do to file a case? Let's say they didn't have a computer, let's say they couldn't go online. They would have to drive to Lawrence or Salem. Once that courthouse is built in Lowell, they'll be able to go and have more of a permanent presence and actually be able to go into a housing court in the city of Lowell.
So they would be able to go. So in other words, once you move into the new facility, people will be able to go to the housing court more than just Mondays?
I would anticipate that, yes. Okay. And I don't want to speak for the clerk, but I suspect that they will have a greater presence in that building, greater than the 1 day a week. I could see it being more of a 3, maybe even 4 days a week, perhaps. Okay. And that depends on the leadership of the Northeast. As I mentioned to you, we do have a first justice, Judge Dalton, and now we do have an acting clerk, Jeff Hernandez. The governor just recently appointed or nominated a clerk magistrate, which is Allison Cole. She was actually my predecessor. She worked in the administrative office of the Housing Court. Very, very gifted and talented individual. She knows the community in the Northeast, particularly in Lowell. So I suspect they'll have more of a presence here in Lowell, greater than the 1 day a week.
Okay. And you told me before we started off camera that you've had the opportunity to tour the new building.
I did.
And so not many people have had that opportunity. So could you share a little bit of how that went and what's it going to look like?
I have to give DCAM a lot of credit. They have designed this building to be a state-of-the-art building, which provides, again, multiple enhancements that we've seen throughout the district court, the Superior Court. So we would be on the 6th floor as the plans dictate now. We would have a clerk's office which is contiguous to the judge's lobby, and the housing specialist would also have offices located there. So for instance, we can have the ability to do mediation off hearing time. When I say off hearing, if you had a case scheduled for the Monday and you wanted to schedule a mediation, let's say the Friday before the Monday, perhaps we would have the ability to have individuals come and meet at that point in time. I'm really excited about the courthouse. It's a beautiful facility. I know parking is something that we're working through.
Yes.
And that's something that we're excited that we have the partners in the legislature that understand that it's very important to have the courthouse accessible to the litigants that will be serviced by the courthouse. But I'm excited. We're talking about fall 2020 or for the grand opening. So stay tuned. I'm looking forward to that, and I think the communities of Lowell and the surrounding communities are going to really enjoy the courthouse.
And I think the city is expecting to construct 2 parking garages in the Hamilton Canal Innovation District, one that would be adjacent to the courthouse and another one that would be somewhat distant, but that should take care of some of the parking problems that are bound to be there as soon as it opens if we don't have those garages ready.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you've been a great guest. I think this has been very helpful, Ben, and I just wanted to thank you very much for coming on. Welcome back to Lowell.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And this is Senator Ed Kennedy. This was the 4th edition of the Beacon Hill Buzz. We'll see you next time. Thank you.